My name is Nora Holloway, and I am 33 years old, and I want to tell you about the 47-minute that changed everything I understood about my father, my family, and the specific distribution of a life he had built across 68 years without ever fully explaining himself to any of us while he was alive. My father, Raymond, died in January. He had been sick for 8 months, a lung condition that progressed faster than the doctors had initially suggested it would, and his death arrived at the end of that progression in the specific way that expected deaths arrive, with a kind of terrible confirmation of what you had known was coming and had not been able to fully prepare for, regardless of how long you had been preparing. We were 3 siblings. I was the middle child. My older brother, Dean, was 37 and lived in Nashville, where my father had lived, the one who had been geographically closest and had managed most of the practical elements of my father's final months. My younger sister, Kyla, was 29 and lived in Atlanta, where she had moved after college and built a life that had diverged from the family's in ways that had created a specific distance between her and my father that neither of them had ever fully addressed. I lived in Cincinnati. I had been the child who maintained the most functional relationship with my father across the previous decade, not because we were close in the emotional sense, but because I had developed the ability to manage the relationship without requiring it to be more than it was, which was my father's version of love, expressed through the specific controlled restraint of a man who had spent his life believing that showing too much was the same as losing something. We had not all been in the same room in 4 years. The last time had been a holiday event that had produced a specific rupture between Dean and Kyla over something I have never fully understood, and that neither of them had resolved, and that had made subsequent family gatherings something all 3 of us avoided by finding individual reasons not to attend the same events at the same time. Raymond's attorney was a woman named Catherine Marsh, who had handled his legal affairs for 9 years, and who called us each individually in the week after the funeral to say that we needed to gather for the estate reading. She said she had something she needed us to see together rather than separately, and the specific way she said it communicated that what she had was not a standard document that could be mailed or summarized over the phone. We gathered on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after my father died, Catherine's conference room in Nashville, a round table with 4 chairs, one for each of us and one for her, a laptop at the center of the table, and the USB drive. Catherine placed the USB drive on the table before we sat down. She had sealed it in a clear evidence bag with a chain of custody label attached to confirm it had not been accessed since my father delivered it to her office 11 months before his death. My father's handwriting was visible through the plastic of the bag on the label he had attached to the drive itself. Play this together. Dean looked at it. Kyla looked at it. Neither of them said anything. I looked at it and thought about my father's handwriting, which I had seen on birthday cards and the occasional letter across my entire childhood, and which had not changed in 40 years. The specific, careful handwriting of a man who had learned penmanship in the 1960s and had maintained it. Catherine explained that our father had delivered the drive to her office 11 months before his death, with specific instructions that it be played for all 3 of his children simultaneously in the event of his death, and that no portion of its contents be shared in advance or separately. She said there was no paper will. The drive contained both the legal distribution of his estate and his explanation of it. She said she had not watched it herself beyond confirming that the video file was intact and playable. She said she was going to start it and then step outside the room, and that we should come get her when we were ready. She connected the drive to the laptop. She angled the screen so all 3 of us could see it. She pressed play, and then she left. My father appeared on the screen in his home office, the flannel shirt he wore on weekends, the chair behind his desk that I had seen him sit in my entire life, the specific way he held himself when he was about to say something he had been thinking about for a long time. He looked directly into the camera. He cleared his throat once, and then he said, "I have things I should have said while I was alive, and I am saying them now because I have run out of other opportunities, and because you deserve to hear them, even if the timing is not what any of us would have preferred." He said, "I recorded this 11 months ago, when the doctors told me I had more time than I apparently have." He said this in the specific dry way my father said things that were painful, with the levity that was his version of acknowledging something hard. Then he said, "I am going to talk for a while. I need you to let me finish." He talked for 47 minutes. The first 20 minutes were about his life, not the version of his life we had heard at holidays, the curated account of professional achievements and decisions that had worked out, the actual life, the version that included the things that had not worked out and the reasons behind them, and the specific accounting of a man who had been sitting alone in that chair for 11 months after a diagnosis knowing he was not going to have another opportunity to be honest. He talked about his marriage to our mother, who had died when Kyla was 11. He talked about what that marriage contained that we had not known. Not secrets in the dramatic sense, but the ordinary intimacies of a relationship that parents do not share with their children. The things she had understood about him that nobody else had. The specific way he had collapsed when she died and rebuilt himself without ever showing the collapse to anyone. He talked about the years after she died and what raising 3 children as a single father had done to him. Not in a language of complaint, Raymond did not complain, but in the honest accounting of a person who had done something as well as he could and understood that as well as he could was not the same as well enough. He talked about Dean first. He said Dean had become the person Raymond had leaned on after our mother died, and that leaning had cost Dean something Raymond had only understood in the past few years, that asking your 12-year-old to be the steady one in a household of grief is a way of taking something from them that you cannot give back, and that Raymond was sorry for it. I watched Dean at the corner of my vision while my father said this. Dean was looking at the laptop screen with the specific expression of a person who has been holding something for 25 years and has just had it named accurately for the first time. He talked about Kyla. He said Kyla had been the youngest and the most like their mother, and that he had not known what to do with that resemblance, that every time he looked at her, he saw the person he had lost, and that he had managed that by creating distance that she had experienced as rejection. And that was not rejection, it was grief wearing the wrong face, and that he was sorry she had spent her life interpreting his distance as something she had caused. I watched Kyla's face. Then he said my name. He said, Nora. He paused for a moment after he said it, looking at the camera in the specific way of someone who has been thinking about what to say next for a long time. He said, you were the one who kept showing up. He said, I did not thank you for that the way I should have. I told myself that your showing up was just who you were and did not require acknowledgement, and that was a failure of mine, because the truth is that showing up consistently in a family that made it difficult to show up consistently is not just who you are. It is a choice you made every time, and I saw it. I just never told you I saw it. I had been holding myself together through the first 30 minutes of the video with the specific focused effort of someone who has decided they are not going to cry in front of their siblings. I was not successful after minute 31. None of us were. He moved into the estate distribution in minute 32. He explained every decision the way he had apparently decided every decision deserved to be explained, not as legal language, but as reasoning. He had owned a house in Nashville and a rental property in Murfreesboro and 3 financial accounts and a life insurance policy and the specific accumulated material of a 68-year life. He explained that Dean would receive the Nashville house because Dean had been managing it for the past year of his illness, and because Dean had been the one who showed up on the practical level, and the house was a practical inheritance for a practical man, and he meant that as the highest compliment he knew how to give. He explained that Kyla would receive the rental property in Murfreesboro, and a letter he had left separately with Catherine that was not for the video, addressed to Kyla specifically, that he wanted her to read alone. He explained that I would receive the financial accounts, which were more substantial than I had known, because I was the one in the family who understood money as a tool rather than an end, and because he trusted me to use what he had built in a way that honored the building. Then he said something I was not prepared for. He said, the 3 of you have not been in the same room in 4 years. He said, I know this because I have been paying attention, even when it looked like I was not paying attention. He said, I want you to do something for me that I am not able to require legally, but am asking directly. He said, I want you to have dinner together. Not today, not this week, but before the year ends. I want you to sit at a table and eat a meal and talk about something other than me. He looked at the camera. He said, I should have done more of that while I was alive. Consider this me doing it late. The video ended. We sat in silence after the screen went dark for what I estimate was approximately 3 minutes. The 3 of us in the conference room with the laptop between us and the sound of the building outside the window and nothing else. Dean spoke first. He said he saw it. He was not speaking to either of us specifically. He said it to the room. He said all of it. He saw it. Kyla had her hands flat on the table. She said, he left me a letter. Her voice had the specific quality of someone who is not sure yet whether they want to open something or need more time before they are ready for what it might say. I said, yes. We sat for another minute. Then Dean said, I'm going to get Catherine. He stood. He left the room. I looked at Kyla across the table. She said, did you know about any of that? I said, none of it. She said, the part about me looking like Mom. I said, I did not know he saw it that way. She said, I thought he just... She stopped. I said, I know. She said, I thought he just did not like me. I said, I know. I said, he did not know how to tell you otherwise. She said, 47 minutes on a USB drive. I said, that was his version of telling you. She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. Catherine came back in with Ian. She handled the legal paperwork with the specific, efficient care of an attorney who understands that documents and grief occupy the same space, and that both require attention. We signed what needed to be signed. She gave Kyla the sealed letter. Kyla put it in her bag without opening it, which I understood. We walked out of the building together for the first time in 4 years. The Nashville afternoon was cold and bright. We stood on the sidewalk and nobody said anything for a moment. Then Dean said, are you both hungry? Kyla said, yes. I said, yes. We went to a restaurant 2 blocks from Catherine's office. Nothing planned, nothing significant about the choice, just the first place that had space for 3 people on a Tuesday afternoon. We sat at a table and we ate and we talked. Not about my father, not about the video, not about the estate, about our lives, the actual current shape of them, the things we had been doing in the 4 years since we had last been in the same room. It was the dinner my father had asked for. We did it the same day, which was sooner than he had specified, and which I think he would have found both surprising and exactly right. Kyla read the letter 2 weeks later. She has not shared what it said, and I have not asked because whatever he wrote to her belongs to her and not to the account of that day I'm giving here. What she said when she called me after reading it was enough. I said, good. She said, it was really enough. I think about the 47 minutes often, not the distribution of the estate, which resolved cleanly and without dispute because my father had explained every decision in enough detail that none of us had anything to contest. I think about the chair and the flannel shirt and the way he looked directly into the camera and cleared his throat once before he started. I think about a man who spent 68 years finding it difficult to say the things that mattered and who sat down 11 months before his death and said all of them into a camera he had set up in his home office and then handed the drive to his attorney and trusted that we would eventually sit in a room together and let him finish. He was right that we would. We always were going to. We just needed him to set up the room. Drop your city in the comments. Hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.